The mountains always looked calm from far away, especially in late autumn when a thin layer of fog sat low over the treetops, making the ridges seem softer than they really were. But anyone who lived in the small towns tucked along the Appalachian Trail knew that the mountains had moods. Some days they felt welcoming, like a quiet friend. The other day they felt heavy, like they were hiding something under their roots and stones. People often said the land carried old stories, stories too dark or strange to talk about unless you were deep into the night and a few drinks in. Most of the time, those stories faded like smoke in the wind. But one story never quite died, and its shadow could still be felt in the town that sat closest to the old cave. Hollow was small, the kind of place where everyone noticed if you changed your front porch light or parked your car in a different spot. Kids walked to school in groups, not because it was unsafe, but because their parents had grown up that way and didn't see a reason to change. People trusted each other, or at least pretended to. They liked simple routines, church on Sunday, supper at 6, doors locked only when the news said it should be. From the outside, the town seemed peaceful, almost frozen in time. But when you lived there long enough, you learned to sense the quiet tension beneath the surface. The way neighbors smiled a little too quickly. The way certain topics were avoided. The way no one ever brought up the cave unless they had to. The cave itself sat about a mile past the old lumber road, hidden behind a line of pines that grew in tight rows, as if they were trying to guard whatever lay inside. People rarely went near it anymore. The opening wasn't large, just a jagged slit in the hillside, but there was something about it that made people keep their distance. Even hikers who didn't believe in superstitions said the air felt heavier when they passed by, as if something unseen was watching from the dark. Local teenagers used to dare each other to go inside, but over the years those dares stopped. No one talked about why, they just knew better. Before everything happened, before the town was forced to face what had been sitting in front of them for years, the people involved lived normal enough lives, or at least they looked normal. That was the thing about quiet towns, you could hide a lot under routine. There was a young woman who everyone knew but no one really understood. She kept to herself most days, walking to and from work with her head slightly down. Some thought she was shy, others thought she was cold. The truth was that she was tired in a way that made her chest feel tight whenever she woke up in the morning. She carried a kind of sadness she didn't have words for, the kind that came from living too long in a place that remembered too much. Then there was the man she worked for. On the surface, he seemed decent, steady job, clean clothes, the kind of guy who volunteered at town events and always helped fix someone's broken fence. People liked him because he played the part well. But those who paid attention, the ones who watched instead of speaking, noticed how he carried himself. There was a sharpness to the way he looked at people, especially the woman who worked under him. A strange mix of interest and something harder, something that didn't feel right. He spoke kindly to her in public, but when no one was looking, his tone shifted. Softer, but not in a gentle way. More like he was testing her reactions, measuring what he could get away with. They weren't close, not in any way that looked alarming from the outside. But there was something about the way he hovered near her, something about how she tensed whenever he came too close, something about how she avoided eye contact even when he insisted she look at him. People noticed, of course, but they didn't say anything. Not because they didn't care, but because the man came from a family that had always been important in town. Old money, old land, old connections. The kind of family that made problems quietly disappear. So people told themselves there was nothing wrong. That she was just shy, and he was just friendly, and the tightness in the air around them meant nothing. There was also a boy, barely out of high school, who had seen something months earlier that he didn't know how to explain. He had been hiking near the cave with his cousin when he heard voices coming from inside. Not loud voices, but whispers, echoing off the rock walls in a way that made it impossible to tell where they came from. His cousin had laughed it off, said it was probably animals or wind passing through. The boy had tried to believe that, but the sound stayed with him. Something felt wrong about it. Like the cave was breathing, waiting. He thought about telling someone, but after the adults brushed off his earlier worries about other things, he learned to keep quiet. No one listened to kids unless they were saying something easy. What none of them knew, not the woman trying to keep her distance, not the boy afraid of his own memory, not even the man who believed he had control over everything, was how close they all were to the moment when their paths would crash together. The cave had been sitting there for generations, holding its secrets in the dark, changing the people who went too near it. But something about this year felt different. The air carried a weight, a tension that pressed against the town like a storm that refused to break. Some said the mountain had moods, others said the people were the ones who changed. Either way, the balance that kept stable was shifting. Little signs appeared, animals avoiding the woods, strange sounds at night, people waking up from dreams they couldn't explain. Most ignored these things, brushing them off as stress or imagination. But deep down, even the ones who had felt the same quiet truth growing inside them, something was coming. Something that began in the cave and would not stay hidden much longer. If anyone had paid closer attention, they might have noticed how the man seemed more tense than usual, his eyes sharper, his patience thinner. Or how the woman's steps grew quicker when the sun began to set. Or how the boy found himself standing outside the line of pines again, staring at the cave entrance with the same uneasy feeling from months before. The signs were there, scattered like pieces of a puzzle, but no one put them together. Not yet. Because in towns like, danger rarely walked in with noise and warning. It crept in quietly through cracks in routine and places people avoided. And the cave, a place the town had feared, ignored, and whispered about for years, was about to remind them that the past never stayed buried. Not there, not in the Appalachians, not in Hollow. The weeks after that quiet shift in the air were subtle enough that no one could point to a single moment and say, "That's when everything began to fall apart." But the truth was that the unraveling had already started, slow at first, then sharper, like a rope weakening strand by strand until the final snap became unavoidable. The woman felt it before anyone else. She noticed how the man had started finding excuses to keep her longer at work. At first, it was small things, needing help with inventory, asking her to double-check files, wanting her opinion on something he could have easily handled alone. He acted like these were innocent requests, but his eyes lingered too long, and his voice softened in a way that made her skin crawl. She would nod, pretending not to notice the shift, but every time she walked home afterward, the tightness in her chest grew a little more. He began stepping closer when he talked to her, brushing past her in narrow hallways even when there was enough room. He asked questions he had no right to ask, about her family, her friends, whether she was seeing anyone. She answered with short, careful responses, always trying to avoid giving him anything that could fuel whatever curiosity he had developed about her. But he didn't stop. If anything, the more she avoided him, the more interested he seemed to become. People around town noticed the change, but they didn't say anything. Some out of fear, some out of habit, and some simply because they had seen similar situations play out before. The man's family name carried weight in. No one wanted to be the one to accuse him of crossing lines, not when he could easily twist the story and make them look foolish. So they stayed silent, telling themselves they were imagining the tension. Meanwhile, the young woman's life grew more complicated. She had rent to pay, bills piling up, and a mother whose health had been getting worse. Her paycheck barely covered what she needed, and the man knew that. Whenever he sensed her struggling, he was quick to offer help, extra hours, small bonuses, favors that seemed helpful on the surface. But each offer came with a look that made her feel trapped, as if every bit of kindness had strings attached. She felt like she was slowly being pulled into something she didn't choose, something she couldn't easily escape. The boy, the one who had heard the whispers in the cave, also began sensing changes in the town. He didn't know how to explain it even to himself, but he felt as if he was constantly being watched whenever he walked past the woods. The cave bothered him. The memory of those strange voices kept replaying in his mind, especially at night when the wind pushed through the trees in long, eerie breaths. He tried to ignore it, tried to focus on school and his part-time job, but the feeling never fully left him. Then one afternoon, he passed by the woman on her way home from work. He had seen her around town many times before, but this time she looked different, tense, distracted, like she was carrying something heavy inside her. She kept glancing over her shoulder even though no one was behind her. He almost asked if she was okay, but he didn't know her well enough and he didn't want to seem strange. So he watched her walk away, wondering what kind of weight could make someone look that afraid. Around the same time, the man began showing signs of pressure from outside his small bubble of control. His family's finances weren't as strong as people in town believed. The business he ran had been losing money for months, and his father had been pushing him harder than ever to fix the problem. He hated being told he wasn't doing enough, especially by his father, who had never seen him as capable. The pressure made him more irritable, more demanding, and more desperate to prove he could handle things on his own. Instead of addressing the real problems, he focused on the one thing he thought he could control, the woman. He told himself she needed him. He convinced himself that she relied on him, even though she avoided him more each day. He twisted her silence into something he wanted it to be, imagining attachment where there was only fear. The more stressed he became, the more he used her presence to soothe himself, even though she clearly wanted distance. He started showing up at places where he knew she'd be, pretending it was a coincidence. The grocery store, the diner where she grabbed coffee before work. The alley behind the shop was where she took her breaks. Each time he attempted to start conversations, pushing boundaries she had tried so hard to protect. She responded politely because she felt she had no other choice. If she upset him, she risked losing her job, and losing her job meant losing her home and the ability to help her mother. Her fear grew quietly. She didn't tell anyone, not because she didn't want help, but because she didn't believe help would come. The town had seen women complain before. It never ended well, especially not when the man involved came from a respected family. So she kept her fears to herself, allowing them to grow in the dark, twisting into something unbearable. At home, her mother noticed the change. She saw how her daughter came through the door with stiff shoulders and distant eyes. She asked if something was wrong, but the woman always shook her head and forced a smile. She didn't want her mother to worry. She didn't want to add more stress to an already fragile situation. So she swallowed everything, telling herself she just needed to be careful to stay away from him as much as possible. But avoiding him became harder every day. The boy's life was shifting, too. After hearing strange stories from other teenagers about odd noises near the cave, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was drawing him back there. He didn't want to go near it. He hated even thinking about the place. But he felt as if the cave was sitting in the back of his mind, waiting for him to pay attention to it again. Some nights, he even dreamed about it, waking up drenched in sweat with the sound of whispers echoing in his head. He tried telling his cousin again about the voices they had heard, but his cousin brushed him off, laughing like before. "Man, we were just tired," he said. "You're thinking too much." But the boy didn't feel tired. He felt alarmed. He felt watched. And even when he was surrounded by people, he sometimes felt the same cold dread he had felt standing near the cave months ago. Then, as if the mountain itself was pushing events together, paths began crossing in ways none of them expected. One night, the woman stayed late at work because she needed the extra money. She didn't want to, but she didn't have a choice. When she finished, she noticed the man was still there, cleaning up the back office. He told her she didn't have to walk home alone. He insisted on driving her, even though she said she was fine. When she declined again, his expression changed, subtle but sharp enough for her to feel the danger in it. She left in a rush, heart pounding, walking faster than usual. As she cut through a quieter street, the boy happened to be heading home from a friend's house. He saw her again, the same tense look on her face. She walked as if someone was behind her, even though the road was empty. He slowed his pace, watching her disappear around a corner, and something inside him told him she wasn't just tired or stressed. Something was wrong. That same night, far from town, a group of hunters claimed they heard strange noises near the woods. Not animal noises, something else. They brushed it off as wind or imagination, but the story spread quietly the next day. It slipped into conversations like a warning, though no one could say what it meant. But those who had grown up near the mountain could feel the shift. They didn't talk about the cave often, but they felt it when the land was restless. The man heard the rumors, too. He dismissed them at first, but the more he heard about strange sounds, the more irritated he became. His life felt unstable. His business was failing. The woman he fixated on kept slipping away from him. The mountain itself seemed to be whispering back at him, reminding him of the secrets he had hidden years ago, secrets he prayed would never come to light. Because there were things he had done long before this, things the town didn't know, things connected to the woods and the cave. He told himself he had acted out of desperation, that no one would ever find out. But lately he found himself waking in the middle of the night, sweating, hearing echoes that weren't real. He felt guilt pressing on him, crawling under his skin. And guilt, mixed with fear, made him more unpredictable. The woman noticed his growing intensity. The boy noticed her rising fear. And the mountain, silent for so long, seemed to pulse with a strange energy that made the people uneasy. Their lives were slowly weaving together, strands twisting with every passing day. The man's obsession deepened. The woman's fear sharpened. The boy's curiosity darkened into dread. And beneath all of it, the cave waited. The closer they moved toward each other, the stronger the feeling became. That something was building, growing, pressing against the fragile walls of their small world. They were heading toward a breaking point none of them could avoid. And the mountain knew it long before they did. The night everything snapped didn't start with a scream or a warning. It began with silence, thick, cold, and heavy enough to make the air feel wrong. The fog had come down from the mountain early that evening, rolling through the streets in slow waves that swallowed the edges of houses and blurred the glow of porch lights. People stayed inside, shutting their windows against the sharp wind that carried the smell of wet leaves and something else they couldn't name. Even the animals were restless, packing in barns and scratching at doors, uneasy for reasons no one understood yet. The woman finished work later than she meant to. Her body felt tight with exhaustion, and she wanted nothing more than to go home and collapse into bed. But when she stepped outside, the street was swallowed in pale mist. She hesitated. The walk home wasn't long, but tonight the air felt wrong, like she was stepping into a world that didn't want her there. She pulled her coat around her shoulders and walked faster, her footsteps soft on the damp ground. Behind her, a door closed. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. She could feel him watching her, the man whose presence had become a shadow she couldn't escape. He said her name in a soft voice that didn't match the look in his eyes. She kept walking. He called her again, firmer this time, telling her to stop. She didn't. A sharp fear rose in her throat. She didn't know what he wanted tonight, but she knew it wasn't anything she could give. He followed her down the empty street, his steps quickening to match hers. He called out again, telling her they needed to talk, his tone twisting in a way that made her heart pound faster. She felt his hand brush her arm, not gently, not accidentally. He was trying to stop her. She pulled away, her breath coming out in shaky bursts. She told him she wanted to go home. She told him she didn't feel safe. He froze for a moment, stunned that she dared to say it out loud. Then something dark flashed across his face. He told her she was overreacting, that he was only trying to help, that she needed him. His voice grew louder, echoing through the fog. She backed away, trembling, repeating that she wanted to leave. He stepped forward. She stepped back. He reached for her arm again this time, as if grabbing something he believed belonged to him. The boy happened to be nearby, taking the long way home to clear his mind. The fog made it hard to see, but he heard voices, sharp, tense, broken. He stepped closer, squinting until he made out shapes through the mist. When he realized who they were, his stomach tightened. He had seen the woman's fear before. He had sensed something wrong in the man's stare. But now the danger was right in front of him, spreading through the cold night like a sickness. The woman tried to pull free, her hand slipping out of the man's grip, but he caught her again, harder this time. She cried out, a short, raw sound that cracked through the quiet street. The boy froze. The man snapped his head toward the noise, eyes narrowing as if trying to figure out who had heard them. The woman used that moment to break away, running toward the edge of town where the old lumber road began. He chased her. The boy, breathing fast, followed a few steps behind, unsure what he could do but unable to walk away. The woman didn't think about where she was running. She just ran. Her feet hit the gravel road with uneven steps, her breath burning in her throat. The fog thickened around her, swallowing the trees. She could hear him close behind, calling out her name in that same twisted voice, promising things that sounded more like threats. Her mind blurred with panic. She just wanted to get away. She didn't notice where the path was leading until it was too late. The line of pines rising ahead, the dark curve of the hillside, the jagged crack in the earth that marked the cave entrance. She stopped at the edge of the opening, chest heaving. The cave looked like a black mouth waiting to swallow her whole. For a moment she thought about turning back, but then she heard his footsteps pounding up the road. She had no choice. She stepped inside. The cave air was cold and damp, thick with the smell of soil. Her hands shook as she reached along the rough stone wall, trying to guide herself deeper where the man might not find her. But the cave was smaller than she remembered from the stories, narrow, trapping sound in its tight passages. Her breaths echoed loudly, too loud. She tried to quiet herself, but fear made everything louder. Then he entered. His figure filled the narrow entrance, blocking what little light the fog had given. His expression had changed into something she had never seen before, something stripped of reason, stripped of the false kindness he had used to control her. He wasn't calm. He wasn't pretending anymore. He stepped deeper into the cave, calling her name, but now his voice had lost its softness. It cracked with anger, with entitlement. He said she had pushed him too far, that she had embarrassed him. That she owed him something for everything he had done for her. She moved deeper into the cave until her back hit a cold wall. There was nowhere left to go. She tried to speak, tried to tell him she didn't owe him anything, but the words tangled in her throat. He moved closer, reaching out, and something inside her snapped. She screamed and shoved him away with all the strength she had. It wasn't enough to stop him, but it startled him. He stumbled back, hitting the uneven ground with a grunt. The boy reached the entrance just as the scream cut through the cave. He hesitated, fear rooting him in place. He wanted to run in. He wanted to help. But the darkness inside felt alive, the walls whispering like they had months before. His body shook. Another shout echoed from inside, anger, then fear. He stepped forward, drawn by instinct more than courage. Inside the cave, the man lunged again. She pushed him back, her hands shaking. He grabbed her wrist, squeezing until pain shot up her arm. She tried to twist free, panic flooding her chest. He yelled that she shouldn't have run, that she had forced his hand, that everything would have been fine if she had just done what he wanted. She saw something in his other hand, a sharp glint of metal from a pocket knife he carried for work. She didn't know when he pulled it out. She didn't know if he meant to use it, but the sight of it pushed everything over the edge. She fought harder, desperate, terrified. He grabbed her throat with his free hand, pushing her back against the wall. The air left her lungs in a harsh gasp, her vision blurred. She begged him to stop, her voice breaking. But he wasn't listening anymore. He was too far gone, swallowed by the mix of fear, anger, and power he had clung to for so long. Then something happened, quick, chaotic, almost unreal. She swung her arm blindly, hitting his wrist hard enough to loosen his grip. The knife dropped, clattering against the stone. He lunged to grab it. She tried to push past him. The cave floor was slick, wet from the constant drip of underground water. Their feet slid. Their bodies crashed together. And in that frantic scramble, the man grabbed her again, pulling her down with him. She fell first, her shoulder hitting the stone. He fell on top of her, reaching for her face, shouting something she couldn't understand. Then the knife, still on the ground, shifted under their weight. The blade slid. His body jerked. A raw, sudden sound tore from him, a mix of shock and pain. He pushed himself up, confused, eyes wide. She scrambled away, gasping, not understanding what had just happened until she saw the dark shape spreading across his shirt. He looked down at it, blinking fast, as if refusing to accept what his eyes were seeing. The boy reached the mouth of the cave just then and saw the scene through the dim light. The man on his knees, shaking, the woman pressed against the wall, trembling. Their breath filled the air with panic. For a moment, no one moved. The man tried to stand, but his legs buckled. He pressed a hand against the wound, blood seeping between his fingers. He stared at the woman with a look that wasn't anger anymore. It was disbelief, fear, maybe regret, or maybe the realization that he was losing control for the first time in his life. He whispered something, her name maybe, or a plea. His voice cracked, his body swayed. She didn't move toward him. She couldn't. Her body was frozen, her mind too full of the terror he had carved into her over months. The man collapsed. The cave echoed with the sound. The woman covered her mouth, a guttural sob breaking out of her. The boy rushed inside, dropping to his knees beside her, asking if she was hurt. She shook her head, but her body wouldn't stop trembling. She couldn't catch her breath. The cave felt too small, the air too thick, her heartbeat too loud. The man lay still. Blood pooled around him, dark and glossy on the stone floor. Panic hit the woman in a sudden wave. She kept saying she didn't mean to do it, that she didn't touch the knife, that it was an accident. The boy didn't know what to do. He kept saying they needed help, but she shook her head violently. She said no one would believe her, not against him, not in this town. The cave seemed to close in around them, the dripping water echoing like faint whispers. The boy stared at the man's still body. His mind spun. He wanted to run for help, but he also knew she was right. The town would twist the story. They always did. She stood on shaky legs, wiping her face with the back of her hand. Her voice cracked when she said they had to leave, that they couldn't stay, that the mountain had taken enough from her already. She stepped toward the entrance, her body weak, her steps uneven. The boy followed, still shaking, still glancing back at the body on the stone. Behind them, the cave swallowed the last echoes of the man's breath. And outside, the fog thickened, hiding everything the night had just witnessed. In the days that followed, the cave became more than a place sealed off by crime scene tape. It became a wound that would not close. Riley sat alone in her kitchen long after the sun had come up, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she never drank. She kept telling herself that Maria's death had been a split second of madness, an accident pushed forward by fear and anger. But the truth pressed against her chest every time she breathed. She replayed the night again and again, searching for a version where she had stopped herself, where she had walked away, where Maria had lived. Every version felt harder to believe. She wanted to see herself as someone pushed too far, someone cornered. But the more she tried to explain it, the more her excuses sounded thin and selfish, even in her own head. Jake tried to act as though everything around him was normal, but he was the worst liar in town. He walked through his store with a tight jaw and eyes that never settled. People whispered when they thought he couldn't hear. They spoke about the search teams, the news crews, and how Maria's face was everywhere. They mentioned the cave, the stories growing darker with each retelling. Jake felt the weight of all the questions he didn't know how to answer. He kept thinking about how fragile everything had been, even before Maria walked into that cave. But what bothered him most was how he had stepped back at the moment Riley needed him to step forward. He didn't know how to forgive himself for that. For the townspeople, the cave shifted from a childhood dare spot to a source of dread. Parents warned their children not to go near it. Teenagers who once bragged about exploring the tunnels now crossed the road to avoid looking at the tree line. The news vans parked along the side roads, their cameras pointed at the darkness beyond the tall pines. Reporters dug into Maria's life, Riley's past, and Jake's business troubles. They made charts of timelines and motives as if the truth were just a puzzle waiting to be put together. But the truth felt scattered and slippery, leaving the town grasping for answers that made sense. People wanted someone to blame, someone to point to and say, "There, that's where it went wrong." Riley's father stopped going to work. He sat by the living room window with his elbows on his knees, staring at the police cars that came and went. He had always believed Riley was steady, even when she doubted herself. But now he wasn't sure what to believe. Every time he looked at her, he saw the girl he had raised, the one who used to follow him around with a notebook and ask him questions about the forest trails. But he also saw the woman who had come home shaking and covered in dirt, unable to form a full sentence. He wanted to protect her, to tell her that everything would be okay, but he couldn't piece together a lie big enough to cover what she had done. Maria's parents arrived 2 days after the search teams found her. They walked through town with blank faces, moving like people who were only half awake. They visited the sheriff's office, then the cave, then the motel where they stayed. They didn't speak to reporters. They didn't shout or accuse or demand anything. Their silence unsettled everyone more than anger would have. People expected tears or screams or some kind of scene, but they got quiet stares instead, stares that made them turn away in guilt. Maria's parents never said Riley's name aloud, but the town felt it anyway. At work, Jake overheard customers talk about how they had always sensed something off about Riley. Some claimed she had a temper. Others said she was jealous of Maria's calm nature. None of them knew anything, but that didn't stop them from forming opinions that spread fast. A few blamed Jake, too, whispering that he should have stopped things before they spiraled. Some talked about money troubles and love triangles and secrets that never existed. Rumors grew like weeds, choking out whatever truth remained. Riley tried to stay inside, but the walls of her house felt too tight. Every sound made her jump, the doorbell, a car engine, a dog barking outside. She felt the whole town pressing in on her. She didn't know if they hated her or felt sorry for her, and she wasn't sure which felt worse. When the sheriff came by again to ask more questions, she avoided his eyes. She answered what she had to, stumbling through half-formed sentences. She kept waiting for him to say the words she feared most, to tell her that he knew everything and that it was time to pay for it. But he didn't. He just wrote things down and left her with the same unreadable expression. The guilt broke through her at night. She dreamed of the cave, of Maria's breath echoing off the cold walls. She dreamed of running through the dark, unable to find the way out. She woke up gasping, thinking she still had dirt beneath her nails. She tried to convince herself that she wasn't a monster. She told herself that people in pain sometimes do things they can't explain. But every morning she woke up with the same truth. She had crossed a line she could never step back over. Jake wanted to talk to her, but he didn't know how. He drove to her house twice and sat outside without getting out of the truck. He had rehearsed what he would say, that they needed to be honest, that they needed to face what had happened, that he wished he had done something different. Instead, he drove away each time, feeling worse than before. He didn't know how to carry the part he played, even if he hadn't touched Maria. He had been there. He had seen Riley falling apart and didn't stop her. He wondered if that made him just as responsible. The sheriff grew quieter as the investigation continued. He knew the town wanted a quick answer, a name, handcuffs, a headline. But the story he saw unfolding was messy, filled with fear, confusion, and mistakes that didn't fit neatly into crime categories. The cave itself felt like a character in the case, shaping the choices people made inside its walls. He spent nights at his desk going over every report, every interview, every detail. He wanted to believe that there was still a way to understand what had happened, but the deeper he went, the more he felt the weight of the cave's darkness. The town's mood shifted from shocked to restless. People wanted justice, but didn't know what justice meant in a story like this. They held candlelight vigils for Maria. They posted angry comments online. They questioned how someone could walk around free after what happened, even if no one had officially said who was responsible. The story spread to nearby counties, then to state news, and so Countless strangers had opinions about Riley and Jake and the cave that had taken more than one life over the years. Riley's world shrank to her bedroom, her kitchen, and the bathroom mirror she couldn't look into for more than a few seconds. She felt like she was fatting, losing pieces of herself every time she remembered the sound of Maria falling. Some days, she thought about confessing, walking into the sheriff's office, and letting everything fall on her shoulders. Other days, she convinced herself that saying it out loud would destroy not just her life but her father's, Jake, and the entire fragile line of truth the town clung to. She didn't know which choice was right, and every hour that passed made the silence feel heavier. In small towns, people are shaped by what they survive, and now everyone felt the tremor of what had happened. Families argued more. Friends pulled away from each other, awake imagining the cave swallowing them whole. It was as if the town itself carried the guilt, the shame, the fear, and didn't know how to put it down. Riley walked outside one evening just as the sun dipped behind the trees. The air smelled like rain, and the sky held that gray-blue color that made everything look softer. She stood on her porch, staring at the forest where the cave waited in the shadows. She wondered if the darkness inside it ever felt the weight of what people carried into it. She wondered if places could remember. She wondered if forgiveness was something she would ever deserve, or if some mistakes lived forever in the soil. Her father opened the door behind her but didn't step outside. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Both of them stood there, knowing that life would never go back to what it was before Maria stepped into the cave. The world had shifted, and all that was left was the slow, painful path through the aftermath, where every choice felt like walking on broken ground. The cave stayed silent, but its shadow stretched over everyone. And no matter how much time passed, the town would always feel the memory of what had happened there, as if the earth itself refused to let it fade. In the months that followed the arrests, the dust never truly settled over Briarwood. It was as if the town tried to push forward, to return to that quiet life people once took for granted, but every trail, every parking lot, every diner booth carried a shadow of what had happened. The cave still stood in the hills, sealed off and guarded, but people whispered about it the way families whisper about a relative they're ashamed of, quietly, cautiously, and only when the lights are off. When the trial finally began, the courtroom felt smaller than it was. Maybe it was because everyone in it seemed weighed down by the truth. Hayes looked thinner, older, the lines in his face deepening each time a witness stepped up. He didn't try to hide from what he had done. He didn't once fight the charges. He sat there with empty hands and a voice that barely carried when he spoke. Some people said it was guilt eating him alive. Others said the cave had taken something from him that night, something he would never get back. No one knew for sure, but his silence said more than any confession could. Mason, on the other hand, tried to hold himself together. He showed up clean-shaven, dressed well, trying to seem like the responsible man he once was, or at least the man he wanted people to believe he was. But the evidence crushed him piece by piece. Every message, every lie, every twisted threat he made against Lena filled the room with a cold kind of anger no one could ignore. He looked toward the jury with watery eyes, almost begging them to see the man he used to be. But no amount of regret could paint over what he had done. His past kindness didn't matter anymore. Not when a boy was dead. Not when a woman's life had been ripped apart. Lena took the stand on the third week, something the whole town held its breath for. She looked calm, composed, and far stronger than anyone expected. She told the truth with a voice that didn't shake once. She didn't try to make herself look innocent, and she didn't try to turn Mason or Hayes into monsters. She just laid out the facts, step by step, even when they made her tremble from the inside. She spoke about the fear she had carried for months, the way Mason's control had tightened around her life, and the way Hayes had slowly slipped into a darkness she never saw coming. She didn't cry until she stepped down from the stand, when her legs nearly gave out under her. Her honesty changed everything. It stripped away the rumors that had been floating around town, tearing the false stories apart one by one. People realized she wasn't the reckless woman Mason had painted her to be. She wasn't some irresponsible mother. She was asking for trouble, as some had shamefully whispered early on. She was someone who had tried to survive in a world that kept pushing her down, someone caught between two men whose choices destroyed everything she held dear. The verdict came at the end of the month. Hayes was sentenced to decades in prison, even though the judge admitted he saw signs of deep emotional breakdown and manipulation. The law didn't care about broken hearts or twisted intentions. It only cared about the fact that a child was gone and another man lay dead. Hayes didn't fight it. As he was taken away, he didn't look at the crowd or the cameras or even at Lena. He kept his eyes fixed on the floor, as if he couldn't bear to face the world he had failed to protect. Mason was found guilty on every charge tied to coercion, harassment, and unlawful surveillance. Even though he hadn't touched the knife or stepped inside the cave that night, his actions had pushed Hayes toward madness. The court saw that clearly. He was given years behind bars, but many in Briarwood whispered it wasn't enough. Some wanted him gone forever. Others said he was already living inside a prison long before the cops found him, a prison built out of jealousy, fear, and control. Lena didn't celebrate either verdict. There was no victory to be found. She went back to her small rental house on the edge of town and spent most days in silence. The guilt didn't leave her, even though she had done nothing wrong. She carried the weight of both men's choices, as if she were somehow supposed to have stopped the storm before it ever started. She avoided the grocery store for weeks. She couldn't stand the way people looked at her, some with pity, others with judgment, others with a sadness she didn't want to share. A few tried to comfort her, but she wasn't ready. The only place she found any peace was the small bench outside her house where Caleb used to sit and tie his shoes before school. She would sit there every morning, staring down the street as if she expected to see him running back home. As time passed, Briarwood changed in ways no one expected. Parents became stricter. Couples grew more cautious with each other. People whispered more, watched more, suspected more. What happened in the cave became a warning that spread through the town like a quiet wind. People started talking about emotional abuse, jealousy, and manipulation, things no one really talked about seriously before. Schools brought in speakers to talk to teenagers about warning signs in relationships. Counselors saw more people in a month than they used to see in a year. Even the sheriff's department began offering workshops, something unheard of in a place that once believed family issues should stay private. The case also stirred debates about mental health and how quickly quiet suffering can turn into something violent. Some argued Hayes had been a victim of long-term emotional manipulation and should receive psychiatric help sooner. Others said that there was no excuse, that no amount of emotional pain can justify taking a life. Both sides argued for months, and even today, no one fully agrees. But one thing became clear: this wasn't just a story about a crime. It was about the hidden battles people carry inside them. It was about the way fear and jealousy can twist a person beyond recognition. It was about how power, emotional, physical, or psychological, can destroy lives when left unchecked. As the years went by, the cave remained sealed. No one wanted tourists showing up. No one wanted thrill-seekers trying to slip inside. The locals believed the place held too much pain, too much history soaked into its walls. Some said they heard things at night when they walked near the tree line, whispers, footsteps, soft crying. Others said that was nonsense, that the only ghosts haunting the town were the memories of people still alive. Lena eventually left Briarwood, quietly, without a goodbye party, without an announcement. She packed what she needed and drove away before sunrise. Some said she moved to a bigger city where no one knew her name. Others believed she went somewhere quieter, somewhere she could erase everything and start fresh. No one knows for sure. But every once in a while, someone swore they saw her in the distance, standing on a hill, looking out toward the mountains, like she was trying to forgive a place that never forgave her. Hayes remained in prison. Reports said he kept to himself, reading books and avoiding the yard. Some guards claimed he talked in his sleep, whispering Caleb's name over and over. No one knew if he would ever forgive himself. Mason's fate was less clear. He appealed, lost, and eventually faded from public attention. Most people in Briarwood preferred not to think about him. It was easier that way. In the end, the case reshaped the town's understanding of justice. No one walked away happy. No one felt like the punishments brought any comfort. Justice didn't feel like justice when so many lives were broken. The law had done its job, but the community learned the hard truth. The damage left behind by obsession, fear, and broken trust can't be erased by a single verdict. What happened in that cave left a scar on Briarwood, a reminder of how fast normal life can shatter, and how even the smallest cracks in a relationship can grow into something deadly if ignored. It taught parents to listen more closely to their children. It taught people to check in on their friends, to watch for signs of fear behind a smile, to take threats seriously, no matter how small they seem. And maybe the hardest lesson of all was realizing how fragile the line is between love and control, between protection and possession, between frustration and violence. Human behavior is never simple. People want to believe they understand the ones they love, that they can predict who someone will become. But the truth is far more complicated. Even the kindest person can stumble into darkness if pushed far enough. and even the strongest person can break when fear creeps into their life. Years from now, when Briarwood tries to forget, the mountains will still hold the memory. The wind will still pass through the trees with the same cold whisper that people swear carries the voices of those lost. The cave will still sit in the hillside, sealed away like a secret too dangerous to uncover. And the town will always remember that once, in the quiet heart of the Appalachians, love, fear, and power twisted together in the dark until lives were lost and nothing was ever the same again.